Good evening. You're listening to or watching Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We're talking national political news of the day, although we're going to start off with some state news about the California Democratic Party. Dave and I were both elected delegates to the California Democratic Party endorsement convention, and it was held this last weekend in Sacramento. A couple of very interesting developments. The basic highlights are that Barbara Lee secured an upset win for the most votes for an endorsement for the three. Actually, there were four candidates for Senate. We'll talk a little bit about that. It does not mean an endorsement by the party. A candidate would have had to have gotten 60% of the delegate votes in order to land the official endorsement. However, she got 42%, I believe, to Adam Schiff's 41%, and then Katie Porter was far behind at 16%. I think she made a couple of mistakes at the convention, which we will discuss. But this is an upset win, so much so that I think the party leadership, which favors Adam Schiff, didn't even bother to announce the results on Sunday morning after they happened at the closing session. It was very strange, but we'll talk about that. But another very big event at the convention made national news during all day long Saturday. There were pro-Palestinian protests outside. The media has estimated that there were about 2,500 demonstrators. When you consider that's about how many delegates were inside, that's pretty sizable. It got a little bit raucous. A group of them got in during the session where each of the Senate candidates were making their presentations. They were disruptive, although I'm going to point out that I think that they wouldn't have been as disruptive if the people up on the stage had kept their cool. That sound system was so ridiculously loud. I was actually talking to Dave here on the cell phone earlier that morning when the music was going on. I had to hang up on him and walk outside in the hallway, go upstairs where I could actually hear him. So it was that loud, and quite frankly, when the presentations were going on, I wouldn't have even known the protesters were in the room. That's how loud the sound system was, except that the chair and the candidates kept looking over and letting themselves get stalled. If they just continued, they would have drowned the demonstration out. Anyway, they stormed that, and then hundreds of them got through later, and all of the events of the evening were shut down, including all of the ethnic caucuses, Black Caucus, unfortunately, even the Arab American Caucus. So that didn't happen. There were parties that were scheduled with some incredible food. We'd actually tried some of the food the night before in one of them. All of that food was donated to shelters, so that's a good thing that came out of it. But they made an impression and national news for shutting it down. I want to say that, although the Democratic Party leadership is very indignant about what happened, there were no acts of violence inside. There was a little scuffle between some protesters and some pro-Israeli demonstrators that ended up in an Israeli flag being taken. But even that was pretty minor as to what could have happened. Inside, there was no violence and no vandalism at all. I mean, not of anything, not even of the county. So we'll talk about it and the fallout from it. But Dave, there's other things that happened at the convention, but I think those are the two major things. What were your impressions, Dave?
Yeah, I'd like to kind of follow up on your observations. Thank you for the intro, as always. A couple of the interesting takeaways from the things that you added. Number one, I just want to clarify for folks that as we know, Israel-Palestine conflict is a national and international hot button issue. There was an expectation that ahead of time that there were going to be protests and people, I guess, running the event, the party itself, but also some of the membership also planned on being part of some degree of protest, particularly
Yes.
the Progressive Caucus had. I attended a panel that they held that had two people, a Palestinian historian and also a Bay Area Palestinian activist with family in Gaza, and also three people kind of representing Jewish perspectives, two about their upbringing and their culture, particularly non-practicing, basically cultural Jews who are not particularly devout, just kind of
Yes.
sharing with people what it's like to grow up Jewish and the family traditions and history that gets passed down, but also one of the co-founders of Jewish Voices for Peace. So that was planned ahead of time for the Progressive Caucus to share with anybody who wants to get more nuance on the picture, and so the big picture of what's going on. And so in that context, then these protests, I think it's important to point out that there were outside organizations on the street. And also, like I said, Jewish Voices for Peace and probably several or even many others, including we saw a Christian nationalist group waving Israeli flags,
Yes.
being belligerent with the other protesters that resulted in police closing down the streets around where we were at the time. So it's many different interests represented outside the convention center. And then inside, credentialed people, basically delegates, observers, others who are involved. There's about 3,000 delegates, but I was told that they expected upwards of 4,000 people total on premises. About 1,000 of those fall into the camp that we represent, which are elected by our community in our assembly districts. So there was protests going on inside, peaceful. Like when we first arrived, well, at least when I first arrived, they were singing songs and sitting down, kind of taking up space. There was a private security force there that had, metal detectors, bomb sniffing dogs, and they were heavily scrutinizing everybody. But then once you got inside, you had free access to all of the events, including the main floor. So there were protests in the hallway of people that were credentialed. And then during like you said, during the senatorial candidates' speeches, they were very loud, and some even came into the room. And the idea was like, you guys should do this out in the hallway. So I think that was the push, that was the effort, the work of the party leadership to kind of just, if you're going to do this, do it a little bit more quietly. If you're going to do this, don't do it in this room. So that was kind of the pushback that I witnessed, or that I think was the main thing here. You also didn't mention Lexi Reese. So in addition to about 41% and change for Barbara Lee, about 40% and change for Adam Schiff, and about 16, I think, percent for Katie Porter, there was Lexi Reese, who was a Google executive. I'm not real former Google. I don't know if she was an executive. Former Google person of interest, tech sector, venture capitalist type person. She got about 1%. So I'm not really sure
three
how.
Votes.
Three votes. Yeah. And somebody said she's credentialed, which means she might have voted for herself. So I'm not really sure what that was all about. So you won't have to talk about her much more, although she did actually have very intelligent things to say, but she wasn't really a main candidate, to be honest.
I think she made a mistake at the very beginning, telling people we need to breathe deeply. And she sounded a lot like Marilyn, what's her name, who runs for president both times.
Oh, Marianne Williamson.
Marianne Williams, yeah. And that sort of left people. But she did say she was for the ceasefire, and the protesters apparently weren't listening to that. But yeah.
And you read my mind here. That's where I was going to go next, is that Barbara Lee did not have any interruptions. She had supporters, no interruptions. The supporters were listening diligently. Even in the hallway, they weren't yelling when she was talking. They were letting her get her message out. So that was clearly the defining factor for the protest. They were simply saying ceasefire now as loud as they could. And when Barbara Lee gave her speech, she was not interrupted. And the party leadership didn't like this. Chair Hicks did. Later, I mean, you could talk about this, but he insinuated there were going to be consequences for people who were involved in the disruption, claiming that it's a violation of the commitment that we all signed on to decorum, properly carry ourselves respectfully throughout the process and let people be heard.
Right, we're not clear on what they're investigating, whether it's people who engineered it or whether that would extend to people who just got up and were a part of it. It was left very ambiguous. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and I think you and I are going to do a more extensive kind of debrief on this subject, and we'll talk to other colleagues about it because it's going to be an ongoing thing. But the leader of the Progressive Caucus, Fatima, she did. I saw her on this. So we were in Sacramento. We had the benefit of having access to Sacramento news in the hotel, and so I did watch some of the coverage. And what her position was, hey, I once people break through security into the building without getting checked, there is the real possibility. You never know. You never know. So she did say if the shutting down of the building was taken in the name of security, that she approved of that. So it's one of those things where trying to bridge the gap and saying like peaceful protest needs to be allowed. And even Ro Khanna came out and said, I support peaceful protest and I support Fatima and the Progressive Caucus. Like Ro Khanna, the Congress member from the Bay Area, who's the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, he did support the people's right to say their piece about this this most important public concern.
Yeah, I want to say that one of the reasons cited for shutting down the events on Saturday evening. First of all, there was somebody who planned out really badly. There was MR Room 8 where the Arab Americans were having to hold their caucus, and then Democrats for Israel was going to be an MR9. That was a really bad planning, but it didn't happen, of course, because they were all shut down. But I think we need to consider a little bit. I'm going to go to the Sacramento Bee is reporting that Jewish Voice for Peace a spokesperson was saying that because one of the reasons cited was that there were Jewish members, Jewish delegates who felt frightened based on things that had happened and the rest. And I'm a little put off by the dismissal of that, but I do understand what the Jewish Voice for Peace person is saying when they say that the caucus was peddling a false narrative. The group said that the protest was peaceful and that it was Democratic Party that decided to cancel scheduled meetings and receptions. Further, nobody was threatened because of their Jewish identity by the protesters, some of whom were themselves Jewish. In fact, a number of them were wearing black shirts that read "Not in my name" on the front and Jewish Voices for Peace on the back, identifying themselves as Jewish. But this isn't really sensitive to people. There's been a lot of violence, some really bad things that have happened, including a death down in Southern California due to a scuffle. So I think that's a little bit dismissive of the people who fear it. Now, I was raised in the Bay Area in a left-wing family. I'm used to this kind of protest. I don't even, I don't even bat an eye to it. But to people who are from different cultural milieus, for them to storm and come into that hallway was an aggressive act. And there's no getting around it. It is an aggressive act. No, they weren't threatening anybody. They weren't calling for even the destruction of Israel. There's a lot of debate about what is meant by from the river to the sea. But and apparently there was a white supremacist anti-Semitic flyer that was being handed around. They were immediately told to leave by the protesters and the rest. So I think the protesters' intentions were good. There was not a lot of violence. The rhetoric was even kind of even-handed, but it was an aggressive act. It's an aggressive act to push your way through the security in large numbers and get in there. And people who aren't used to that type of protest would get nervous. The other thing I think the party is upset with, the party leadership, is the fact that it may have impacted the Senate nomination election. It may be why Barbara Lee took votes at least at the expense of Katie Porter and possibly also at the expense of Adam Schiff. And so they might be seen as, so this was unfair type of a thing. But the fact of the matter is Katie Porter just kept looking over and telling them to shut up, blah, blah, blah. And it, it has an impact. Just let them have their say, continue talking because they were playing, the music in between, and that totally drowned them out. And the protesters all left then. If they just continued talking, let the protesters do their thing. Anybody who was sitting over by the protesters, of course, you and I were on the opposite end, but I wouldn't even hurt them. And anybody sitting by just needed to move to the center. There are plenty of seats and could continue. Protest is part of the American democratic tradition. It happens. But I also don't think that the protesters and those advocating them should be dismissive that people were afraid who are not used to that type of culture.
I know we only have a little bit of time left, and like I said, you and I are going to cover this elsewhere, and we'll share this, our thoughts, more nuanced thoughts, more complicated and detailed thoughts elsewhere. But two things come to mind here. One is I agree with you 100% that it's interesting that the fact that Barbara Lee came out ahead then left the situation where we didn't see or hear about that. That's the party establishment, for folks who don't know, it's a conventional wisdom that they support Adam Schiff, and that the progressive vote is sort of split between Katie Porter and Barbara Lee. But this is one issue that is a definitive difference between the two. I have nothing but good things to say about Katie Porter, but the way she did, carry herself probably did, if anybody was on the fence, they probably were like, oh, wait, we better really rethink this a little bit, which is unfortunate. And then Barbara Lee was clearly the beneficiary of that. Secondly, I just want to clarify that, like I said, the people who pushed through into the arena, they were not part of the convention. These are absolutely protesters who were outside the convention. And then they pushed through into the building. So that's a different security issue. That's a different security threat. That's a different consideration. The actual participants protesting were allowed to be there, and were, categorically, 100%. There was no arrests, no vandalism, and no violence inside.
Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! I can smell the flag! I can smell the flag! I can smell the flag! All the flag! All the flag! All the flag!
So the interesting thing is that very same Saturday night, while we were at the convention and dealing with these issues, we learned that there was possibly a ceasefire deal that had been brokered. Apparently, at that time, all of the details hadn't been worked out. And even today, I'm not sure if Hamas has confirmed it, but Israel has announced a ceasefire deal. I think that under Israeli law, there are 24 hours for Israeli citizens to protest the release. Apparently about 150 women and teenagers are going to be released in return for 50 Israeli and American and Thai hostages, 50 of approximately 250 that they are holding. And in addition to that exchange, there's going to be a temporary pause. Nobody wants to call it a ceasefire, but it'll pause for 5 days. They'll allow a bunch of relief trucks to get in, allow for the Gaza citizens to move to where they think it might be safe. I don't know where that would be, but it's an encouraging thing. It's something that was apparently brokered with help from Biden and Qatar, and also Egypt to some degree. And of course, it's not enough. I mean, a lot of progressives are calling for a permanent ceasefire, but it's a step. It's a start, and it is actually the first major diplomatic breakthrough of this whole conflict. Maybe some hope that this will settle down. But Israel has insisted that they're going to continue the war until all of the hostages are released and Hamas is destroyed. I don't know what they mean by destroyed. I don't know what would constitute indications of that, but that's their position currently. However, they're open to negotiating further one-day extensions of the ceasefire for 10 hostages. That could go on for a while, but this is encouraging news. It's a big deal, and credit apparently Anthony Blinken and Biden's team for really being diligent about this. They've been really pressing for this for a long time, and maybe it'll be the a lead up to something better. But also, it could just blow up in the world's face at any moment with the wrong thing happening. Dave.
Yeah, so these negotiations were undertaken under leadership, I think, of the Qatari and Egyptian governments, and I didn't see Jordan's government in there, but they have been making comments at leading up to this. Most notably Queen Noor herself, but also saying that they are going to defend or at least monitor rather their border to make sure that ethnic cleansing doesn't result in people heading in their direction. But so this. I think the technical term that the people wanted to try to say is a humanitarian ceasefire. A humanitarian pause, so that they don't have to use the term ceasefire. But realistically, it's semantics. It's a temporary ceasefire. And so, like you said, it's 50 Israeli hostages getting released by Hamas, women and children, in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners who are also said to be women and children. They did. Teenagers under 18. I think they use the term under 18. So I think I told you this before, that I've begun looking at Haaretz pretty regularly. I get their updates. It's like the New York Times of Israel, I would argue.
Excellent. Better than the Post or Times of Israel, in my opinion. But yes.
Yeah, I mean, I had to pick one. I think I try to look under as many resources as I can, media resources as I can, but this one seems to be they do a good job of getting us the information. So they've added that Hezbollah, the leader, has also agreed that they're going to be part of this temporary lapse, especially knowing that there have been some spokesmembers of the Israeli military unofficially, and also of their war cabinet, who have often included Lebanon and Hezbollah in their conversations about this sort of greater Israel concept that people are suspicious about. So the term genocide, it's maybe people said maybe the Pope even said it when he met with families of prisoners, hostages, but then the Vatican walked that back. So I think whether you're talking about experts on genocide, like Omar Bartov, who teaches at Brown, or many hundreds. I think he got 2,500 experts to sign on one of his letters back a few months ago, before this even happened, to describe it as an ethnic cleansing, even because of West Bank activities. But then once this started, post October, then they've been he's published more. So the question is, it's clearly an ethnic cleansing when you talk about, or apparently this is what he's saying, that there are signs that it is an ethnic cleansing, what's been happening both in the West Bank and in Gaza, which needs to be addressed regardless. So this ceasefire, it's a good start, because that's the world. It's not just sort of progressive protesters in Sacramento or around the country. It's literally around the world. And so the humanitarian aid, it needs to be there. It's a humanitarian catastrophe to cut off food, water, electricity, supplies. Before this conflict even started, there was 100 trucks a day going in. That was dialed back to 0, and then it kind of slowly was inching forward to get some relief in there. But now the part of the ceasefire agreement is that there'll be 300 trucks going in. So it is a pause, and this pause will both benefit the harm caused to Palestinian people, but also I think from the strategic perspective, the Israeli military will benefit too. So it's a mixed blessing, I think, for those folks who are being targeted aerially and on the ground by a military. There really is an asymmetric conflict going on here.
Right.
And just last thing I'll mention here is that Prime Minister Netanyahu came out with a statement already saying we will not stop the war after the ceasefire. So again, more belligerence. And in fact, the Israeli police have been directed to break up any celebrations. So as these prisoners that Israel's holding, the Palestinian prisoners, as they're released, the Israeli police are going to crack down on any public celebrations of them. So it's not we're not anywhere near a peace moment. This is really just a breath moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. There's, I mean, you've got 2 to 2.5 million residents in Gaza that are suffering. That this is going to happen, and you mentioned that. Well, it gives the Israeli military a chance to regroup. It also does give Hamas a chance to regroup in whatever tunnels they've got left, which are probably plenty, a lot. And so we'll see what develops, but maybe it could be a catalyst to more involved talks. The problem is that after that horrific event on October 7th, which led to immediately as many as 1,200 to 1,400 deaths of Israelis and their guests. It just that is too much reminiscent of the pogroms of pre-World War II Europe, when Jewish communities would be attacked like this by fanatical Christian groups that believe that all Jews were responsible for Christ's death. I mean, this is what they've been living with for 2,000 years. You got a lot of generational trauma going on there, and right now the mood is in Israel is that they want Hamas defeated. But how do you defeat something like that? I mean, it's Hamas isn't just a military force; it's an idea. Even if you take out the existing military force, something will replace it. Hamas has already replaced different groups that preceded it. It's pretty much replaced the PLO, which was secular rather than religious. So where do we go with this? I don't know. But the only thing we do know is this is the first, a bit of light in what's just been, a month and a half of darkness and death. I believe the number was up over 11,000 Gazan deaths by this time, or by the time of the ceasefire. And actually, ceasefire isn't even going to stop until tomorrow morning. So it's just ceasefire isn't going to go into effect until tomorrow morning. They're still shooting at each other right now, in theory at least. Again, you've got all of the political intrigue, but you got to credit the Biden administration and those countries, and if Jordan was involved, them as well. But Qatar apparently was very instrumental in pushing this. Maybe they'll be able to push some more with any influence they may or may not have over Hamas. Hamas had to sign off on this thing. And again, I haven't found a report that they actually have, but I'm not even sure what the mechanism is. But Qatar and Egypt are reporting it's a done deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some great reporting in Al Jazeera. And they're Qatari based, so that there is a sort of a westward looking approach to journalism and openness and public criticism of political leadership that comes out of Qatar, and even the Taliban. They're when the United States was involved in Afghani negotiations about the Taliban transition to take over in Afghanistan, that those peace talks did happen in Qatar. So they've hosted this kind of thing in the past. I think it's important to note that the Biden administration and our country in particular, whether it's the legislature or most leaders through public mainstream media outlets, we are seeing a little bit of a shift from the sort of unconditional for support of Israel's right to defend itself to now take into account the loss of life and the disproportionate response. U.S. Special Envoy David Satterfield did say today, actually, that Palestinians in Gaza, quote, must be allowed to return to homes in the north as soon as possible. So, right. So there has been rhetoric about
and Bernie Sanders, who earlier had said, I don't know if there can be a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, with a group like Hamas, is now pressuring, saying, but you got to be more selective in how you're doing this. You've got to, you can't be indiscriminate in a message to Israel. So I do think the tide is turning on that. But again, as we've discussed, ceasefire has become a radical concept. But
yeah, and that's like I said, it's a bigger issue about the language and the prism by which we even talk about these things. It's highly loaded and politicized, and people are vilified for being thoughtful and critical, unfortunately. But what I was about to say is that the members of the War Council in Israel have said that they would. It is their goal to make northern Gaza, in effect, unlivable. A difficult place to live as part of their strategy, as far as their tactics. And then so that's a disconnect, I think, from people's understanding of being consistent with previously agreed upon ways for them to coexist peacefully side by side. So these are bigger, more complex issues, but this has been, Arab states, leadership, foreign ministers have said this is a good start. Even Russia said this is a good start. I do have a quote from Noam Chomsky, an indirect quote. I don't have quotes around it, but it came from Noam Chomsky recently. He said, all the talk about, the Bible and the history beyond 100 years ago, the history beyond 1,000 years ago is not where we need to focus our efforts. He's talking about actual existing world in Israel and in Palestine. And he said, the realities of the things that really need to be addressed for peace is the sharp discrimination against Palestinians in Israel. That's a quote. Illegal settlements in occupied West Bank. That's a quote. And destruction of Gaza. That's a quote. So these are things now. These are the contemporary things now that will, if we can address them, if we can talk about them, and we can. I say we, the world community of thoughtful people, that's the way towards having some temporary humanitarian pause become something more lasting, like an actual ceasefire and a constructive path towards the aspirations that have yet to been realized since Oslo.
We've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that something that you want to address?
Talking about? I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
You must have at some point seen for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example. Say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed the hateful content was high. People will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example. You can name one, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know this hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example.
This brings us back to mostly domestic issues, and this is not actually per se a government issue, but it's very important in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. But Elon Musk has been under a lot of fire lately. Last week, he stated an agreement with a Post that basically said that Jewish people have a dialectical hatred of white people. Very interesting that he not only didn't condemn it, but stated he agreed with it. But there have been allegations that he has allowed a lot of anti-Semitic and white supremacist, even Nazi propaganda to find its way onto the platform. And so Media Matters is not a neutral organization. It's a left-wing organization that criticizes what it considers to be the conservative slant in the media, and it deals with a bunch of things. It was founded by David Brock, who very ironically was formerly not just a Republican activist, but somebody who was involved by his own admission in slander He broke the Paula Jones story, and it's Troopergate was his big thing, and a few other things that was really hurtful. He
And that was targeting Bill
made
Clinton, right? That was targeting the Bill
was
Clinton.
targeting Bill Clinton. Yeah, Paula Jones may or may not have been true, but he had a whole story about Troopergate in which Arkansas troops, I don't want to get too far into it, were supposedly acting as pimps for him. So it was a false story, that at least that aspect of it. He had a change of heart. He is now very too much to the left. He founded Media Matters, which broke out a story about and informed advertisers that these Nazi and neo-Nazi messages and anti-Semitic messages were appearing right next to their advertisements. So Elon Musk has filed a lawsuit, is threatening to file even more lawsuits, to basically say that this is a blatant smear campaign. I'm not sure I understand the details of it, but he's claiming that the Media Matters somehow published articles that sort of triggered whatever is going on. I don't understand that part of that. I'm not a techie, but supposedly making use of the logarithms to accentuate its point. So they're going to claim that this led to an exaggeration of it. However, Musk has admitted that at least in some cases, these advertisers have had really bad stuff up next to them, and a number of advertisers have left, have abandoned him, and also some investors in Tesla have abandoned him. And again, this is then the fallout is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, fresh off of his the impeachment attempt against him, says that he's going to investigate whether Media Matters fraudulently manipulated data on XCOM. At any rate, I'm going to let you chime in here, and I've got some other things to add. But let's. What have you got to say?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting because it falls squarely at the crux of people's right to free speech, but also the obligation for platforms to at least monitor and follow their own policy on what amounts to either misinformation and disinformation, or more importantly, actual blatant hate speech. But in particular, Media Matters, the question is, did their report that led to the advertising dollars being removed or at least paused, was that a legitimate and authentic evaluation of how X, formerly Twitter, works? So the claim from Elon, and he's fighting, basically for the survival of the revenue stream of his company, is that they Media Matters knowingly, this is a quote, knowingly and maliciously manufactured side-by-side images depicting advertisers' posts in order to, quote, drive advertisers from the platform and destroy the company, quote, a blatant smear campaign. So that's Elon's position. And somewhat disinterested third party, Mark Schellenberger, I've heard him speak about, they tried to test, they used the methodology that Media Matters claimed was how they came up with seeing an advertiser next to some hate speech. He claimed that they tried to replicate this, and their position is that it was not how the system, how the advertising worked, or what was presenting itself, basically. So there's an open question about the accuracy and authenticity, or was it just an agenda? And like you said, that Texas Attorney General is now saying that they, in theory, want to investigate further. And his quote, Ken Paxton's quote, was potential fraudulent activity by Media Matters, basically saying that, like, hey, you staged this report,
Yeah.
and that's fraudulent. And so what Mark Schellenberger said, which I think is really interesting, is that it's possible that that X, Elon and crew, we know that they fired a tremendous amount of staff when he first took over, and that included the content, review people. So that they're a little bit behind in how they coach their algorithm or how they steer their algorithm. But that it's possible that they made an adjustment as soon as this came out, so that kind of prevented
So
now.
subsequent people couldn't do it. That's possible.
Yeah. So and then I think finally the takeaway that he said, which I thought was interesting, is that's kind of how this is supposed to work, because algorithms are AI. They are sort of unknowable black boxes of decision making and mapping. And if you could, for example, if an advertiser could say, I unequivocally do not want to be associated with any hate speech, theoretically X should be able to, code it in such a way, steer it, teach it in such a way that it no longer does that. And maybe they already did that. So we're going to see this play out over time. And then finally, I'll add Musk. It says, this is from Politico. Musk pledged to file a thermonuclear lawsuit. And he's saying that that he really a boycott against his company, that is an orchestrated campaign that harms him enough that he's going to push back really hard.
Well, and it's been hit. Apple and Walt Disney Company have suspended or halted their spending on the platform. That is, there are very real damages if Media Matters did in fact manipulate the data. I don't know. Again, this is way out of my my realm, but I imagine that's going to be fought out, and there'll have to be a lot of details revealed about it, and where these comments go and how the advertising happens. Maybe the public will get an education here. But it could be chilling if this is just Musk not trying to intimidate and basically a grand slap suit. Slap suits are, of course, strategic lawsuits against public participation, and I'm certain that Media Matters is going to raise that defense. On the other hand, this is potentially very damaging to a company that's having a hard time profiting anyway. So if Media Matters did in fact do this, that's a very serious issue. I don't know what kind of assets Media Matter has. It's pretty much a website. I've used it. I go there sometimes. I mean, it's very one-sided, but it's very useful. It does, and they criticize the media for narratives, for overemphasizing certain voices at the expense of the others. And if you go to the website, you'll see stories. It's not just right-wing media that they're attacking. The media in general, they're trying to act as a watchdog, kind of the similar as accuracy in media is on the right. They're trying to fulfill that role. And But so did they go a little bit, did they push the envelope a little too far this time? I guess we'll find out.
Interestingly, Elon had already sued the Center for Countering Digital Hate back in August after they reported that there's been a rise in hate speech on his platform. He's also threatened the Anti-Defamation League because of their efforts to put pressure on advertisers. So this is part of a sort of a multi-front discussion within our own country about how we manage social media speech, social media news, people's ability to have a public forum in a public space. I think Mark Schellenberger, one of the things he said is that we obviously right now we don't have the government in the mix. Now, granted, Twitter files that Matt Taibbi reported on shows that the government approaches these groups and says, hey, you should look at this. So there is some U.S. government intervention, and it's happening in Europe too. Some governmental intervention in the what needs to be flagged, what needs to be sometimes even removed. But it's not. There's not censorship. There's not First Amendment violations. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about platforms being responsible for the speech that they share and spread and how they spread it. So that's the discussion going on. One of the things that Mark Schellenberger, I think, says that I think is, we'll pick this up in the future too, future conversations. People have a general disposition, a general right to free speech. So like the Supreme Court has found that Nazis and neo-Nazis are allowed to march, and they're allowed to talk, and they're allowed to speak. So that's not what we're talking about. They're free to say hateful and hurtful and ugly and disgusting things. That's not even in dispute. The question, like, this is about advertising getting matched up with that. But more importantly and more broadly, if we do want to protect children, for example, or if we do want to have our sensibilities protected in some way, what he proposes is a future system where people can voluntarily choose what types of filters they want, what level of scrutiny they want on the information that gets presented them through their own feeds. Like, for example, I don't want violence. I don't want hate. I don't want, anti-Semitic, whatever it is. That way you can kind of shape what information comes in your own feed based on a third party, based on some standards, some criteria that is objective and knowable, and we could debate it and discuss it and share it and select it and choose it for ourselves, rather than putting all that pressure on the platforms, which have, to a certain extent, an obligation to reveal and share as much as possible, because that's how it works. Arguments, you've got pros and you've got cons, and we debate things based on facts that sometimes we're uncomfortable with. But if we really truly do want a consumer product or a platform where we're not being targeted or harmed with certain communication, that's where we ought to be leading this conversation. And hope this is not, it's a little bit out of scope for what our current conversation is, but at least it's not an all or nothing Elon versus the world like some people are framing it.
No, and I do have to say that Elon has to be smart enough to know that a lawsuit against the Anti-Defamation League isn't good PR. So it's kind of an act of desperation, actually. And if there's anything to it, then maybe he needs to do that to protect his investment. But at the same time, if it turns out that they can defend what they've said, that's going to be even worse for him and the platform. So, but we all know that X, formerly Twitter, is having a hard time anyway. I mean, you go to Facebook, you can't even you try to link something there, and you can't do the image anymore. It's broken right now. They're trying to work on that, but the image doesn't appear. It says image not available or something like that. Just little things like that, because a lot of their best technical people were let go at the beginning of this. So he's got problems and he's under a lot of stress, but it doesn't help. And I'm sure that in defense in any of these lawsuits, they're going to bring up the fact that Musk himself, okayed or agreed with a profoundly anti-Semitic statement. And one that could add to the increasing violence, and violence and anti-Semitic events have been on the rise, not just only since this war broke out, though it has, but actually over the past 7 or 8 years, they've increased. So it's very important that people be free to report this. So it's we're going to learn a lot more about the details of this lawsuit, but I do definitely want to read. Was it Mr. Schoenberg you said?
Yeah, Mark Schellenberg.
Mark Schellenberg. Yeah, I do want to read his piece and his thoughts on it. But like you said, maybe they fixed the problem. Who knows? It'll be very interesting to see what the techies on both sides say as this case develops.
Yeah, I think if I could just add one last thing before we wrap up. Again, I know this is a bigger issue that we'll be continuing over time to discuss. That at least CNN is reporting that that Musk's lawsuit is being considered by many as in effect here's from the article, a bogus attempt to chill criticism in a way that flatly contradicts First Amendment principles. And that's a quote to Ted Boutros he's a First Amendment attorney. So they went out and they found somebody who said, like, is this even real? And this person, maybe, I don't know much about his background, but it gives a little bit of credence to the idea that it is sort of a circle the wagons kind of thing. Elon has to fight back because if the big advertisers don't show up, his $50+ billion enterprise faces a money losing situation that it's really hard for him to stomach.
This is a big gamble, because if he loses these lawsuits, I don't see how the platform survives, at least unless they can find a way to make it survive without money.
Right.
We'll be talking about this in the future.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
So I'm going to be pretty quick about this. Our attendance at the Democratic convention, the results we saw in the California senatorial race to replace Dianne Feinstein, we saw where the activists' hearts and minds lie. It was about 41% for Barbara Lee, about 40% for Adam Schiff, and about 15% for Katie Porter. Well, it turns out that the establishment really wants Adam Schiff. They pushed real hard on us personally, but also, as we know, just sort of publicly. It's a known public conventional wisdom. But if you add 41% to 15%, you get 55%, right? So 56% rather. So that means that more than half the party is bucking the establishment trend. I'm not sure exactly how close the final vote tally will be, but it certainly looks like Barbara Lee is coming from behind to have a little bit of light and could possibly be that person who pulls through and becomes the next senator from California.
It's certainly a jump start to her campaign. And I'm going to be real quick on that. I'm actually going to predict that next year that the primary will leave 2 Democrats. There's 3 quasi big name Republicans, including the Steve Garvey of the Dodgers fame of the 1970s, great player. I wish he wasn't a Republican, but yeah, it's neither here nor there. But I think that they're going to split that vote enough that it's going to be Adam Schiff and either Katie Porter or Barbara Lee. I don't want to read too much into this event at the convention center, but it's definitely going to help Barbara Lee out. Well, and with that, we will be discussing this in the future. So until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.